All right, folks, it's time to cancel Doctors Without Borders. If you've ever donated to them, you need to call them. You need to charge back your American Express. Take away their money, because Doctors Without Borders is a Hamas propaganda news outlet. That's all they are. You see, Doctors Without Borders, apparently they have some doctors in Gaza. Okay, so that, first of all, is reason enough to cancel Doctors Without Borders. They're helping those terrible terrorist babies who are in the hospital in Gaza. All those babies need to die because they are Hamas sympathizers. They were born Hamas sympathizers. Anyway, Doctors Without Borders is now apparently they've lost contact with all the doctors in Al-Shifa Hospital from their organization, and they are calling for, get this, a ceasefire. Have you ever heard so much anti-Semitism from a so-called humanitarian medical, free medical services organization? They want Israel to stop shooting at this hospital and stop bombing in close vicinity to it. I mean, who are they to tell Israel what to do when they're literally helping terrorists win? There are women and children in this hospital who are wounded gravely. Some of them have had to have limbs amputated. They're total sitting ducks. And these doctors are acting as human shields, trying to stop the Israeli military, the IDF, from charging into this hospital and shooting all the patients in their beds. Doctors Without Borders has no room to cry about, their doctors being in danger, because the IDF, they don't want to kill the foreign doctors. They just want to go in and slaughter the people of Gaza. Your doctors are just in the way. Your doctors are human shields. And now they're complaining about how they're having to manually ventilate 39 infants who are in the ICU, because Israel blew up their oxygen line or something like that, and the power's out, and so they have no way of keeping these babies who are in ICU alive. But actually, you know what? Let me break character here for a minute. I know I'm trying to be this is a very dark subject, so I'm trying to be kind of sarcastic and comedic about it, because how else do you keep this from being a super depressing video? But when I hear stories about babies in incubators, just because of Iraq in 1991, I have to stop myself. I can't just sort of take that at face value and present it the same way I'm presenting everything else, because it's like, story about babies in incubators. Even though it makes sense, this isn't ridiculous on its face, like the 1991 story about Iraq going into the hospital in Kuwait City, bayoneting the babies, and then taking the babies impaled on the bayonets and throwing them out the window. This is not as ridiculous as that babies in incubator story. This one has a bit of logic to it, because it's like, oh, okay, yeah, the power went out. Of course the incubators won't work anymore. And they were running on generator power anyway, so this is a fuel issue. They ran out of fuel. Generators shut down. And according to the evil Hamas front group, actually, wait, no, this wasn't. This was according to Palestinian Ministry of Health, whatever, which is not associated with the one in West Bank, so I guess this is technically Hamas. Or actually, wait, no, it was in Ramallah, wasn't it? So not Hamas, because Hamas is not in Ramallah. They originally said that the 39 babies had died in the incubators when the power went out. Apparently, that was wrong. 39 lived, 1 died. And they made that own correction themselves, which, you know what? From a propaganda standpoint, you could say, well, it's reverse psychology. They're purposefully trying to make it seem like they made a correction like that to give themselves more credibility. But I don't think I don't give them that much credit. I would think that if they said initially 39 babies died in the incubators when Israel cut the power, I would not think that if you're just thinking from a strict propaganda standpoint, you would lower that number back down to 1. If they revised the number from 39 to 1, I would think that that's probably an accurate number. It kind of makes sense to me that in the confusion, even if they're able to keep some of these alive, that when the power went out, one of the babies died. Because as we know, a lot of people have died. People are dying there every day. And people are going to be dying in these hospitals because there's just not enough time to dedicate to everyone. These are people who are all gravely injured. And then, of course, you have regular medical problems, too. I mean, hospitals are built to accommodate sort of a normal flow of people. They're not built to accommodate the apocalypse. And so you have everyone who's got, like, normal medical problems on top of all these people who are crushed under rubble when their apartment building blows up, or when their next-door neighbor's house gets bombed, or when mistakenly their house gets bombed because, oopsie. And if, I guess my regular subs are tired of me talking about this topic, sorry, but it's kind of like when, remember when Yemen was going on? And that was like the worst thing in the world, literally. This is a lot worse than what was happening in Yemen. Hundreds of thousands of people, or maybe it was 120,000, I can't remember. I stopped counting at one point. But it was definitely in the 6-figure range of people died in America's war in Yemen that no one ever talked about, except for like a few obscure podcasters like Scott Horton. That's the only reason I ever even heard about a Yemen war. But anyway, I used to like to do updates on that occasionally because, hey, a lot of people are dying here. It's worth talking about. It's like, well, in Gaza, that many people that would die in, a couple months in Yemen are dying every day in Gaza at the rate they're going. And I believe it's like something like 70% of the population is homeless now because either they've been driven out of the city and maybe their house is still standing, or, even if they are in the south, their house has been blown up. And that's it. You just have people living outside in tents now. And I guess it makes it much easier to dehumanize them because then you can go and look at these animals. They live in tents. And it's like, well, they used to live in normal houses and they had, fine china for holiday dinners, and they had nice clothes that they would wear to their mosque or their church, and they would bathe and they would shave, and now, because they're living outside in a tent, they don't have any of those things and they look dirty, and so we go, ooh, those are dirty people. I understand why Israel wants to get rid of them. Oh, and now apparently the Israel lobby has run $88,000 worth of ads against Thomas Massey in Kentucky, because he didn't vote for the, $14 billion to Israel, which also included $300 billion, if I remember correctly, to Ukraine. But you see, Thomas Massey's an anti-Semite because he didn't want to send $314 billion to Ukraine and Israel, and also I forget there were a few billion for Taiwan as well in that bill. It's like, well, if you don't vote for that, obviously you think the Holocaust was a good thing. And it's like the Israelis have been waving the bloody shirts of the victims of the Holocaust for let me see, how many decades has it been now? We're going on 80 years. And the longer these things go, the hollower it rings, because the further removed we are from that history. Not that it would have ever, even if this took place, let's say, let's pick a random year, 1948, let's say if in 1948, I know this would never happen, but let's just say in 1948, the Israelis decided to ethnically cleanse a huge chunk of their country, kick all the Arabs out of their homes, bulldoze their neighborhoods, wipe their towns off the map, and force them all, into these little tiny camps, push them outside of their borders, and they live in squalor in these tent cities. It's just random. Let's say that happened in 1948, right after the Holocaust. Guess what? appealing to the memory of the Holocaust, which ended 3 years before that, that doesn't make it any better when you displace people and deport them from their country, and you kick them out of their homes, and you wipe their towns off the face of the earth. That doesn't make you the good guy. That, in fact, appealing to that is going to make people, I would think, rational people, make direct comparisons between what you're doing now and what was done by the Germans before and during the Second World War. Because remember, how did the Holocaust start? Oh yeah, it started with deportations. The Germans just said, "Oh, well, we need a space for the German people, and so we got to get these Jews out of here because they're taking up too much room in our country." And so we wish them well, and we're gonna set them up with a new life in Poland where the Jews belong. And then here we are, 80 years later, and we have Bibi Netanyahu talking about his God-given Lebensraum, and how this just isn't that complicated. The more you look at it, especially this time, it's not a complicated issue at all. Because no matter what you say, whatever context you give, that doesn't make what's going on now okay. It's not like with when the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where you had a series of events from 2014 until when did they invade? Early 2022, 8 years there, where the Ukrainian government was engaged in sort of a low scale war, or what would you call it? Low temperature. Not a super active war, but a constant back and forth with the Russian minority in Donbass. And people in the 4-figure range were killed over those 8 years. It was in the thousands. I don't know if it was in like the 2s or the 3,000. I can't remember how many, but it was over 1,000. It was 4 digits. And so finally, after 8 years of that, the Ruskies said, you know what, we're just gonna pick a side here, and we're gonna come in and try and help our guys. You can try and justify that initial invasion, but it is at least rational, even if you don't think it's justified. There's a logic to it. But then when it comes to specific acts in the war, let's say that there was a hospital full of wounded people, civilians, and Russia just decided to cut the power to it. Would anyone defend that? No, I don't think so. I mean, I guess some of the Russia supporters would say, well, that's a terrorist hospital, the same thing that the Israeli supporters are saying now about Doctors Without Borders. But all these people who are, defending Israel in the West now, would they defend that? No, because that would be obviously wrong to cut off the power to a hospital full of wounded civilians and people who are just trying to shelter in place from the bombing. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think I just heard the stat. I should double check this before I say it, but I believe that as of now, from the latest numbers we have, Israel has killed as many civilians in Gaza so far since October the 7th as Russia has killed in Ukraine in, a year and a half of war? And yet we're all supposed to agree, okay, Russia's the bad guys there. This is very bad what they're doing. Really reminds me of the Yugoslav wars, where there was ethnic cleansing on all sides. Every different ethnic group in Yugoslavia was trying to ethnically cleanse the other ethnic groups and carve out their own territories. That is the story of the Yugoslav wars. Yet the only ethnic cleansing that the U.S. and the West ever took issue with was the ethnic cleansing that was perpetrated by the Serbs. But if there was ethnic cleansing against Serbs by the other groups, then the West said nothing. They were stone cold silent. They didn't care. In fact, they endorsed it in Kosovo. And so whether or not the lives of civilians matter, uh, ultimately is a matter of international politics. It's a matter of what ethno-state flag these people have tattooed on the back of their necks. There is no universal value to human life. There is only value in people who are on the team. And if you find folks who are not on your team, who are not team players, then they are nothing but human refuse, or as Ben Shapiro would say, human debris, one of his favorite phrases. Netanyahu would use a more biblical term, Amalek, which is from the Old Testament, of course. Well, I guess it's being cited by a Jewish person, of course it's Old Testament. But the Amalek are people who are marked by God for extermination, down to every man, woman, child, and even livestock, to the extent, I forget the exact example, but it's something to the extent of, you have to kill even their animals so that their name might not be mentioned in reference to, for example, this ox was once owned by the Amalek. You must erase every bit of evidence that the Amalek ever existed. And that, presumably, is Netanyahu's goal here. And it's a goal his allies in Washington share. It's a goal that must be endorsed and supported by everyone in Washington, or else they will be targeted for elimination, like Thomas Amalek Massey. In fact, I think that American Zionists and Netanyahu alike would label anyone who questions the actions of his administration Amalek. I think that my views on this issue would probably get me excommunicated from most American churches. But, if I decided to, let's say, wear a dress and castrate myself, I think they'd welcome me with open arms. That about sums up the state of American Christianity. And, before I end off for today, since it's a Saturday, I feel like I can take my time. I don't have to be as focused. Not that I'm ever focused on this channel. But I want to go back to the comparison with Russia for a second. Because in that case, I typically put the blame on the Zelensky regime. And why is that? Well, more specifically, I put the blame on the United States because Zelensky actually wanted to end the war fairly early on and was going to compromise. Plus, he's a literal clown, and it's very fun to make fun of him. Well, why am I, when I talked about that war in the past, not that I've talked about it in a long time because there's nothing going on, why have I not been as hard on Russia? Why do I treat Russia essentially like they're a force of nature and yet criticize the Ukrainian government as more of a character with agency? And the reason for that is because the Russians stated their terms many times, and there is a long history since 2014 of the Russians trying to reach a sort of a stasis, or I don't want to, the word final solution obviously is very bad connotation. But they had, at least in my review of the historical record, I was live for all this, so I was able to witness most of it in real time. Not obviously in person, but through news reports and things. The Russians had shown good faith to me. And it was 8 years before they ever were involved militarily. And their terms seemed pretty clear. And as we know, they had offered a peace deal that was almost accepted way back in March of 2022. So it seemed to me like the Russians were ready to work out a solution. It was always Ukraine who said that they were not going to compromise and they were not going to negotiate. And so that's why I was a little lenient in, just coming on here every day, every time that there was a civilian casualty in Ukraine, and going, look, this is more blood on Putin. Israel has not taken that approach. Israel's made it pretty clear Their goal is to get rid of these people. They've wanted to get rid of these people for a long time, and this is their best excuse to do it. Hamas gave them the excuse, and Hamas did that on purpose because, Hamas is evil, and they wanted to essentially bait the Israelis into exposing themselves as evil. When this was called Israel's 9/11, as hyperbolic as that was, it actually, from a situational, historical perspective, it is very similar to 9/11, because what did Hamas do? They baited Israel into a war that would make Israel look much worse than the original attackers, which is exactly what Al-Qaeda did with the original 9/11. They baited the United States into invading Afghanistan and Iraq, where the U.S. killed well north of 1 million people in both countries, put together, plus all the other places that the terror war. But we know it was, the last number. I mean, the count was like in 2009. It had reached 1 million dead in Iraq. I think it's safe to say, you kill 1 million people, that's worse than 9/11, okay? 9/11 was 3,000 people. That's really bad. 3,000 people dead, that's a lot of people. How do you think 1 million people, how bad is that? Many, many times more bad. And so Hamas went in, they killed 1,400 people, took reportedly 240 people hostage. And since then, Israel has murdered like 10,000 people. Okay? And there are people who have nothing to do with the initial conflict. Just like those 1 million Iraqis had nothing to do, those first 1 million, who knows how many since then. And, screw all the people in Afghanistan, obviously, I'm not even counting them. But those 1 million Iraqis, how many of them had anything to do with 9/11? 9/11 was a handful of people. It was, people in the double digits, like what, 25 guys or something did 9/11? And plus, a lot of people in the Saudi royal family. And so you go and kill 1 million Iraqis, and you go, well, Al-Qaeda should have surrendered. It's like, what does that have to do with those 1 million people who had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda? It's like, well, they should have returned the hostages. Now, I think it's safe to say that Russia's war in Ukraine has not been productive for them. And so, is it as big of a disaster as the Iraq war? No, not yet. It might get to be there. I'm not gonna give the Ruskies too much credit and say that they wouldn't do that. Well, they did it in Afghanistan because they had, and that's what makes the friggin' American terror wars so much dumber, is that literally they baited Russia into doing the exact same thing back in the late 70s. And I got the feeling that I think Russia learned their lesson from that war. The U.S. clearly hasn't for many of its wars. Now, despite all that, though, humanitarian concerns aside, let's just say you value the lives of the 2 million people in Gaza at zero. In the end, Israel, things might work out well for them. This could end up very favorably for them. I don't want to discount that possibility. Israel could end up with most of Gaza under its control, and they may very well be able to just flush out all the people. That would be a very positive thing from Israel's perspective. And I don't know how long this has gone on. I gotta be, 25 minutes into this or something by now. My original, not that I had much of a point, what was stuck in my craw was not the idea that this is happening, because I can understand why. I think that there are rational actors on all sides here. I think that Hamas wanted to bait Israel into committing atrocities, and Israel wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to ethnically cleanse Gaza. So there are, both sides, their actions make sense. What doesn't make sense to me are the lemmings, the sheep, the shills, who essentially think that these actions are beyond criticism. You know, like, I have no problem saying, hey, if civilians die in a Russian airstrike, that's a bad thing. The psychopaths defending Israel say that not only is every Israeli airstrike a perfect airstrike, to the extent that there are any civilians who are killed, it's like, well, if those civilians were killed in an airstrike, well, then they deserved it because you know, they essentially were born evil. And they're not only making that insane statement themselves, they demand that the rest of us also make that insane statement, because if there's any pushback on that, they're exposed as genocidal psychopaths, and so they need everyone to be in lockstep. And if you don't make that same point, if you don't also say that the kids had it coming, well, then you too are labeled an Amalek. So anyway, I think I've ranted on this too long. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.